Hi everyone, it's James here, and in this tutorial we're going to be creating a really simple React app. Well, it's not really an app, it's just a series of components really that have just been thrown together. And the purpose of it is just to display a kind of social card that you might find in any kind of app. And we're going to be displaying some basic user information such as a person's name, address and contact details. And this user data is going to be generated from a random API, and then we're going to plug that into our app to generate all of our social cards. So let's take a look at a demo and start coding up our simple React app.
Okay, so let's get started making our project. So I'll just give you a quick demo of our final result on the right hand side here. So essentially what we're going to be doing is getting some data from an API and then just displaying a social card with just a bit of information about that particular person. So their name, their address, their phone, and also their image. So this data is actually coming from an API, and if I actually refresh the page, you'll see that the data should change every time the page reloads. And that's because we're just getting a random set of users each time the page refreshes. And of course, we've got a very rudimentary search box here. So if we were to search for a particular letter, it will actually filter people's names based on the string that it finds. So it's not particularly clever, but you can kind of see how a search feature could be implemented as well. Okay, so that's just a quick overview of the final app. In order to get started, we need to get a boilerplate React app set up. And for this tutorial, I'm using Create React App to create all of the necessary files for us. And if you're not familiar with Create React App, you can actually install it on your CLI just with npm install global, and then the package is called Create React App. And then once that's installed, you can then create a new app. If you either navigate into a folder and say create React app and then just pass a period as the first option. And if you want to create an app with a particular name, then you can just pass in the name of the folder that it'll be installed in as the second parameter. So I've already done that in this tutorial, and this is the result that we get. It does take quite a while to install all of the dependencies, so go and make yourself a coffee while that's going on. But this is the result that we get, and if we go to app.js, essentially this is just some boilerplate React code to get us up and running. So I'm actually going to just load that up now, and the way we can get that running, there's actually a script provided to us in the package.json, which is npm run start. And if we let that run through, you can see this is the sample app that Create React App actually gives to us. So we're just going to, first step is just to delete some of the boilerplate stuff in here, because we don't actually want to display that on our particular page. So we're just going to get rid of all that, and probably just go into the CSS file as well and just remove everything that's in there as well. Okay, so we've got a completely blank project now, and the first thing we're going to do within our app is actually get the data from the API and actually store it in our app state. So let's set that up now, and then we'll talk a little bit about how the API works. So I'm going to import two hooks from React, which is the useState and useEffect hooks from React. And then I'm going to create a piece of state called users, and then a corresponding setter called setUsers, and that will just use the useState hook. And I'm just going to initialize users with an empty array to start off with. And then once we've got that set up, I'm going to use the useEffect hook. So we're going to be making some network calls in here, and I'm going to be using fetch. So just to keep things tidy, I want to use the await keyword. So let's make this an async function. But you'll notice that the linter kicks in straight away and says there's a problem. And if we take a look at the message from the linter, it's basically saying that you can use an async function here, but we basically want the useEffect function to be synchronous to prevent race conditions. So if that's not clear, don't worry. The only thing we need to really be aware of here is that we can't use an async function directly here with useEffect, but what we can do is create another function inside there, which is asynchronous. And then just immediately invoke that function when it's run within the useEffect function. Okay, so we want to get the user data from the API. So I'm just going to create a local variable called user data, and then I'm going to wrap our request to the API in an actual try-catch block in case there are any network errors. And we're going to be calling the fetch function from the fetch API, but we need to know where to actually fetch this data from. So this is a good time to introduce our API, which is provided by randomuser.me. So this is a great source of getting random user data. You can see here we've got an example here where we've got a person's picture, their name, and it provides us with loads of useful information like fake email addresses, birthdays, addresses, etc. And this is what we're going to be using to populate our social cards. Okay, so the actual API is here. So this is the URL. And if I just pop that into my browser and have a look at that, you can see this is the result that we get back, but we've only got actually one user here. So we could make this call several times to actually populate all of the users, but handily the API provides us with a results query parameter, and we can just say, well, I want 10 results back. And now we've actually got 10 users with all the data given to us in that response. So this is essentially the URL that we want to call to get our data. So let's pop that into our fetch. And if the fetch request is okay, we actually want the JSON version of the response, not the actual full network request. So let's do another await keyword for response.json. And of course, then we'll catch any errors that occur. And we'll just log the actual error to the console if that does occur. Probably error rather than errors makes more sense. And if we do encounter that error, what we're going to do is just say the user data is equal to an empty array. And if that does occur, what we want to do is make sure that the user data is still set to an empty array. And this probably we'll set the user data directly here as well if we get a good response. And so in this local user data variable, now we'll either have the full response from the API or just an empty array. And thinking about it, I think the actual results here that we get back from the API, there's actually an object rather than an array. It gives us a property called results. So let's just extract that from the results that we get. As I was saying, the user data local variable now will either have an array of results or it will have an empty array. So with that in mind, what we can actually do with our state is actually set the users using the setUsers function, and it should be setUsers there, and we'll just set that to the value that's stored in user data. Okay, so this useEffect function, we don't want to continually call that, we only want to call it once, so we'll just pass in an empty array in there as the second argument to the useEffect, so it only runs on the app loading. And if we save that now and head back over to our app, all being well, if we look in the network tab and then just refresh the page, we can see now that call's been made to the random user API. And if we have a look at the result of that, you can see there we go. There's all of our user data that's been retrieved and has also been stored in the app. Okay, so now we're going to move on to actually getting that data and displaying it on the page. And I'm going to do this by passing each item in the array to a separate component. So let's just see how that'll look within the app component itself. So we've got our local useState, which has all of that data in there. And we're just going to call a map function on there because we know it's an array. And I'm going to get each of the individual users and also its index. And in there, I'm just going to pass in a component, which we haven't created yet. So we'll get onto that in just a second, which is called social card. And for the user data prop that's going to be available on that social card, we'll pass in the actual user, the full user object. And when you're repeating a list of components like this, you need to make sure you specify a key for them, otherwise React will complain and get confused. And there is actually, if you look at the data that comes back, there is actually an ID here property, which should technically have a unique ID for the particular user, but you can see this one, it hasn't actually been filled out. And also, so this is what it should look like here. There's a value here. I guess it's supposed to be replicating social security numbers, but I found looking at this, you can't trust that to be unique. So we're just going to use the index, which is the position of the item in the array, and that should do for our tutorial. Okay, so let's go and create that social card component now. And it's just a case of creating a new JavaScript file called social card. And I'm just going to create a new arrow function. So it's const social card is equal to a function. And inside of here, we're just going to destructure the props. And the only prop we actually need is the user data, I think I called it. And then we just need to make sure that we export this from the actual file so that we can import it into the app file. So we can see we're getting an error at the moment because this doesn't exist in here. So let's just import social card from the social card file that we just created. And you can see that error goes away in the console and everything should be okay in here. And just to check everything's working, let's render a little bit of content here. So from the function that we're creating, which is the component, we'll just return a little bit of markup. For example, on the user data, we should have their name property, which in turn has name first, and also user data name dot last. Okay, so it looks like we've got a problem here in the app.js, so I've probably misspelt something along here. I wonder actually if it's because we're trying to get that property from here before the response.json is completed. Yeah, okay, so it was trying to get the property of results from this function, which hadn't completed at that point. Okay, so mystery solved. So users is now populated, and you can see we're getting each of these components, which is just literally displaying the user's name at the moment. So that's a good start, but we obviously want to get the rest of the user's information and display it in a nice way. So let's go over to the social card component again and start filling out some of this content here. So to start off with, we'll get the set a class name on the overall div that's containing this information, and we'll call it card. And then we'll just wrap this name here in another div. Let's just close our Explorer here just to give us a bit more space. And we'll give that a class name of card underscore title. Because although it's the user's name, it's kind of like the title of our particular social card. And we'll set the class name here to card underscore body. So this will be the main section where we're displaying the address and also their phone numbers and the user's image. And I'm just going to start off with the image. So I'm going to say for the class name of this is the card image. Oops. And just put an image tag inside there, which has a source of user data.picture.medium. If you're wondering where all these properties are coming from, we just need to refer back to the API here. And you can see for the first result here that we've got the name, and then you've got first and last, and I think somewhere down here we've got picture, and we're going to use the medium property that's on that picture object. Okay, so we just need to close off our image tag there just for that to work. And if we save that and go back to the app, we should see the user's images appearing next to their names as well now. So that's starting to come together. But let's add a few styles before we move on to the other sections. And I'm just going to create a new file here, which is socialcard.css. And in order for that to be applied to the component or to the rest of the app, we just need to import it. So it seems like a good place to import it within the component itself. So make sure we've got the extension there as well. Okay, so over in the CSS file, let's put some styles for the overall card itself. So I'm going to put some margin on the top, right, bottom, but leave it off the left side of the element. Let's put a bit of padding in there as well, so 1.5 rems. I'm going to set a static width on it of 250 pixels for each card. And let's put a little bit of box shadow on there just to lift it off the page. 28 pixels and a bit of blur. And oops, we'll just say RGBA 0.1. And just for a bit of interest, bit of animation, we'll just put a transition on the transform. So we had a little bit of scaling on it when you hover over it. And also just make it look clickable. We'll just set the cursor to pointer. Okay, so when we hover over the card, we just want to scale it up a little bit. So let's transform, scale 1.1. And the card title, let's just give it a bold font weight of say 800 and font size 1.5 rem. You actually get quite a nice font included with the Create React app, so that's quite, we don't need to change anything with the actual font styles. So for the card image, we want to push that over to the right-hand side. So just displaying it as flex and setting the justification to flex end. And also to give our image a circular look, we'll just set the border radius to 50%. Okay, so we've got our cards now appearing and the images are on the right hand side, and we've got that little hover effect just to add a little bit of interest when we hover over each of the cards. Okay, so that's looking pretty good. I don't think we need any more styles in there at the moment. What we are going to do though is create separate components for the rest of the information. So for example, in the original components, we had the location, their address basically, and also their phone numbers as well. So we're going to put those into separate components because we might, if we were putting this into a full app, actually reuse that information elsewhere. So I'm going to create another component here and I'll just name it location. And it's got user data location, which again, if we look at the API, this is the location property. So we've got things like street, city, etc. I might just keep that up there for the moment so we can reference that. So let's save our social card component, but we need to go and create this location component. So location.js. Okay, and this is going to be pretty straightforward again. We're just going to create a new arrow function called location, and we'll destructure the location prop which we've passed in, and then we're just going to be returning a template here, some more JSX, and for the overall div I will give that a class name of location, and it's just going to be basically a series of p tags that references some of the information that's coming from this location object. So for example, we can see there we've got location.street .number, and we should probably put something in there for location.street.name as well. Okay, and then we'll move on to the next line. Let's just close this up so you can read that a bit better. And then we're going to have location.city, and then location.state, location.postcode, I think that's all in lowercase, and then location.country. Okay, so don't forget that we need to export this as well, otherwise everything in the rest of the app won't know about it. So export default location. Okay, and if we head back over to our social card, we just need to import that. Hopefully we should see Visual Studio Code might be able to find it for us and import it. I don't think it does. Let's try do it manually here. So import location from the location file. Okay, so the console's looking good here. Let's go back over to the app, and there you go. You can see the actual address is now being displayed within the individual card. And that's just a quick example of how creating a component is really useful, because if we wanted to pick up this location component and use it anywhere outside of this card, we can do that as long as we've got a valid location object that we can pass in. Okay, so before we finish up location, let's just create some styles for it. And another file, location.css. And this is just going to be dead simple. I'm just going to tidy up those paragraph tags that have got quite a lot of margin on them. So let's just put a bit of margin on the top and bottom for the overall location component. And then for the p tags that are inside it, let's just set a margin of 0, just remove that. And back in the JS file, we just need to import that CSS file. So location.css. You can see when the app reloads that the margin's been taken off, and it's just displaying a bit neater. Okay, so we're almost there. Let's just actually add one more component, which is going to be for phone numbers. So let's start off by creating the component, the actual file for it. So I'm going to create a component called phone number.js. And again, another arrow function. And we're going to pass in 2 props to this, which you'll see in a second, but I'll just destructure them here. So it's going to be number and type. And this is just going to be an example of how we can actually reuse a component for slightly different purposes. Okay, so we're just going to be returning a template from here. And just to know, if you're literally just returning a template, you don't need the curly braces with the arrow function. You can do an implicit return, use some parentheses maybe just to keep everything together. And we're just going to be returning one div here with a class name of, I will call it phone number. And inside there will be a paragraph tag. And I'm just going to display the type prop that's been passed in and also the number. So quite a dumb component really. All it does is take some information and formats it correctly and puts it on the page. But you'll see the advantage of doing this in just a second. So if we export default phone number, save that. Before we go back, I'll just add some styles. Again, don't need to do anything too crazy with this. Let's just tidy things up. Phone number.css. And for the phone number, I'm just basically going to set the font style to italic. And the font size, just reduce it slightly so it's not taking up too much space. And just, again, remove any margin from the p tag. Okay, so back in the phone number.js file, let's just import that CSS. Okay, so nothing's displaying within the social card at the moment because we haven't added any of these phone number components yet, but let's go back there and add that in. So import phone number from the phone number file. Okay, so we've got our location here. We probably want to put the phone numbers underneath that. So let's add in one of these phone number components. And if you remember, there were two props. There was the type that we need to pass in, and the other thing was the value as well. And then that will just be rendered in the p tag in the component. So looking at the phone number information that we get, you can see we get two phone number properties here. The first is for the standard phone, which is probably a home phone number, and the second is a cell or a mobile number. So what we can do in here, we can actually pass in a static value for each one. So we can say for their home number, we want to pass in a value of the user data.phone. Okay, so if you save that and go ahead and have a look in the app, you can see we've got the number of home displaying, but yes, the value seems to be missing, so let's just check that. Probably used the wrong prop name, should have checked that. Yeah, okay, so the proper passed in was number, not value. So let's stick with what we've created in the component already. So instead of value here, let's pass in number, if we save that. So you can see here now that the home phone number is displaying. So we could have actually put in both of the phone and cell numbers into this phone component, but what we can do, again to make things more reusable, is to create another phone component and pass in a different type, and then we'll just pass in a different property from the object, and that will generate a second number component for us. So just another example of how components can make things easier to actually reuse things. And again, if we were using this outside of the social card, this phone number component, say it was in a menu option or something up here, then we could actually just pick out this component. And as long as we pass in an actual number and a type, it will display exactly the same. Okay, so we're going to be adding some rudimentary filtering that we saw at the beginning of the tutorial, but before we do that, let's actually just tidy up the layout, because obviously these are all just laid out in a column at the moment, and we don't really want that. So in the app.js file, we're going to put in a title, social cards, and then let's just create a container element here, just to contain our card components themselves, and we'll just give that a class name of cards container. Okay, so we've already got an app.css file, so let's add some stuff in there. Okay, so for the overall app, let's just add a bit of padding just to push it into the page a bit. Close that down so we can see it. And for the cards container component, all we're going to do is just say the display is flex to put them into a row. Just for a quick fix here, let's set the flex wrap to be wrap, and that'll just make sure that they lay out nicely and don't get stuck all on one row. Okay, so things are looking a bit better now, and we can hover over each of those. Let's actually add our input box now and work on the actual filtering function that we're going to be using. Okay, so let's put the elements in first of all. And again, we could put this into a component, but just for brevity and just while we're wrapping up here, I'm just going to put it directly into the app component itself, and it's just a simple input box. And just close that off there. And we'll set a placeholder. And also we're going to be triggering an event every time the user types something, and we're going to pass that a function called filter cards. So let's just stub out that function for now, and we're just going to put it straight in the app component here. And that just has one argument that's passed in, which is the event, which we pass directly from this onInput function here. And just to show you what that event looks like, if we just console.log event, just save that. You can see our input box is there. It needs styling a bit, but we'll do that in a moment. So over in the developer tools, if we go over to the console, if we actually type something into there, you can see we get these events coming through. And there's lots of useful information on these events, but we're just going to go straight to the target element, which is basically the input box that we just typed into. And if we scroll all the way down, there is a value property that comes on there, and you can see that's the text that I just typed into that box a moment ago. So basically, event target.value will contain the text that we're typing into the input box. So just clear the console and try that out. So you can see each time we type something, event.target.value is what stores the actual text. Okay, so what we're going to do with this actual value is to actually filter out all of the cards that don't have a first or last name that match this particular value that we've typed into the input box. But the problem we've got at the moment is we've got all of our users set in this user state, which is fine at the moment, but if we were to then remove things from there, we wouldn't be able to get them back. They'd be lost and we'd have to do another network call. So let's actually create another piece of state, and we'll call it all users and set all users. And then we'll just, instead of using the set users here, we'll just say set all users. When we've got our data, we'll also set users to that as well. Okay, so nothing looks anything different at the moment, but we basically keep a record of all the users that have been returned from the API in all users. And the users variable will be the one that is displaying the cards on the page. So we can filter the users state and then always refer back to all users when we need to. Okay, so let's get rid of that console.log there. Actually, we'll save it into a value and event.target.value, and we'll just transform it to lowercase as well. So we don't get any uppercase, lowercase mismatches. And then we'll create a list of all of the filtered users, and we'll reference the all users state, and then we'll call the filter function on that because it's an array. And then for each user that's inside the array, what we'll do is basically we're returning true or false, so we need some kind of Boolean expression. So we'll just generate a string of the user's first name and also the user's last name. And again, we'll convert that to lowercase as well. Just put this on another line so you can see it. And once we've got that lowercase version of the user's name, we'll just say, does that include the value that the user has typed into the search box? So if that is true, then the user will be kept in the filtered users array. If not, it'll be dropped and be removed from the UI. So once that filtering process has completed, all we want to do is set the users, which don't forget are the users that we want to display on the page at the moment, to the filtered users. Okay, so let's save that and just check that it's working. So let's just type a couple of letters in here. Okay, so typing LA gives us a match here on Loreen, but also here in Nicholas, you can see the LA is being matched in the center of his first name. Okay, so this searching function is not going to win any awards for artificial intelligence or anything like that, or predictive text, but it's definitely a good example of how you can implement some kind of filtering based on a few simple JavaScript expressions. So this, you probably can't see it really, actually this search box is really small, so let's just, to wrap up, just add a couple of styles to that. Okay, so for the search box, I'm not sure if I gave it a class, did I? Let's have a look. Oh yeah, it did. So it's search box, search hyphen box. Okay, so let's remove the outline from it. Let's give it maximum width. Change the border slightly on it, and just use a standard grey color. The font size is 1 rem. Padding of 1 rem. And just give it a slight border radius of 0.5 rem. Okay, so that search box is a little bit easier to read now again. And let's refresh the page and get some new users. And so ROs matches Roland. If we just do an R, we're matching some people here. And if we remove everything from the search box, obviously all of the users are displayed. Okay, so that is pretty much it for this tutorial. Hopefully you've seen how you can set up a simple React app and create some components, and also how you can put data into components and reuse them for different purposes. And we also touched a little bit on how we can handle events within React by creating our simple filtering search box. Okay, so thanks for watching. Just before you go, don't forget to subscribe to support the channel and so you don't miss out on any future tutorials. And I'll see you in the next React app tutorial.